Hello, and welcome to CFS Overtime, the podcast where we like to talk about school, news, and student life. I'm your host, Chris Deckley.
And I'm your host, Alfie.
And welcome to a special episode of the podcast. Today we'll be talking about a more serious topic. I recently participated in the Holocaust Trust Programme, me and another student, Annabelle. We participated in this thing where we learn just more about the Holocaust, and we go into more detail than you usually would learn in school. So today we are going to be talking about that, and I'll be talking to Alfie and to you guys, and he will be asking questions you might ask in the audience for me to answer about everything that's going on while I explain what they gave me and what I wrote down. So we're going to start off with this book called Night by Weitzel, which is actually through the eyes of Holocaust survivor, and I actually haven't read it yet, but this is the type of stuff they actually gave you the opportunity to read and go through in the Holocaust, which you don't usually get in school, do you?
Yeah.
So very interesting. Oprah Winfrey has commented on it, and she said she really liked it as well, which is also in this book. She talks about it, and very interesting about the book. We also got given a like your journey reflective diary throughout, to write about what we done. We ended up having 3 sessions, and one of the sessions were virtual reality, because as you know, it was virtual. We couldn't actually go to Auschwitz, but we got a virtual lesson, and then we've done a VR headset, and that actually got me quite emotional. Like your virtual reality, and you could see like the transportation they took them in those big carriages, which was very sad. And then we saw like the living conditions and what just the whole environment of Auschwitz, which was, it was very hard hitting when you see it in virtual reality. And I can imagine what it would be like in real life as well. That helped me do that. So reflective diary, I wrote some things down. So we used this in between each lesson. So I started off by writing about pre-war Jewish life, about how like the population of Jewish people throughout just every country. There was like 10% of Poland were actually Jewish people, which is great to think, considering that's where Auschwitz was. 300,000 in Germany and 330,000 in Britain, which are good numbers for Jewish people. There was a Jewish football team in Lithuania. There was like families in Greece, and they were eventually rounded up and sent to Auschwitz. So, and also in France, there's a very close-knit community of Jewish people. And Poland, like I said, 10% of Poland. And then obviously they were eventually given badges and stars to wear. And also in Hungary, there were Jewish soldiers that fought in the First World War, which is very, very impactful, considering they were sent to concentration camps, even though they fought for their country. And one of like the really important things that wasn't mentioned when we were learning in school was that a lot of Jewish people didn't identify as Jewish. There were Jewish people who might not have known their Jewish background. So they'd call themselves German. There were German Jewish people who would say, "Oh, I'm not really Jewish, I'm more German." They'd participate in German life, German school, German culture, but just because their parents, maybe grandparents, lived in a Jewish way, they were also sent to the camps, which is it's just crazy to think about when you're not, you're supporting a certain nation and they turn your back on you like that.
So basically, even if you had just heritage of Jewish heritage, they would put you in the camp. It
was they were trying to completely wipe out the race of people, and others we'll get into as well. No matter, if they find any trace of Jewish heritage or anything, they will most likely send you to a camp. And they talked about like Jewish lives as well. They talked about synagogues as well, about Jewish, how it was like the heart of the town, and they used to worship it, and like loads of communities, not just Jewish people, would come and celebrate around it. There would be weddings. It was like Jewish pride, and it contributed a lot to city life as well. So that was very interesting. It was just they went into more detail that you wouldn't learn in school overall.
Yeah.
So they also talked about like Auschwitz-Birkenau, obviously the main camp. So the transport, there were big carriages, nowhere to sleep, nowhere to like maybe go toilet, and it like a lot of Jewish people would actually pass away in the carriage due to like bad living conditions. The arrival, they were just sent as quick as possible. Like it was like a business at this point of just sending people. And they live in the barracks as well. When they got to the camp for like maybe days, maybe months if they were workers. But the main aim, let's not forget, there were survivors, but the main aim was to wipe out every Jewish person.
Yeah.
So if it were to see, they were going to be wiped out. Jewish life were to be wiped out. So whether you were working or not, you were planned to die, which was just it was horrible to think about. And in the barracks, so there were lack of personal space, which could have led to like serious mental issues as well as physical. There was disease within the barracks. The living conditions reminded me of like chickens being kept in like, you know, in a farm, like the way they were stacked up. You know how like chickens are so, like sometimes have slow, very close personal space.
Intensive farming.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, that's how I thought the living conditions were. And yeah, that's that for the living conditions. We also talked about the gas chambers. And I have so many questions throughout it, like did Germans have any guilt, you know, what? And there were these certain specific troops given a certain job called the Sonderkommando, who would actually take the Jewish people's like bodies and organize them. And we've also seen in school like how there were like boots like piled up, like the Sonderkommando would be the ones to transfer all the clothing and living stuff like and organize it. So you know, Jewish people also like noticed they were going to die before they got put in the chambers with all the boots and all the like, you know how sometimes piles of hair as well, which was just terrifying. So general reflections I believe that we need to fully understand why we must never do something like this again. Which this helped me a lot. And what this done for me, it gave me a better understanding and a further understanding of what the Holocaust really was. Like some people know about the Holocaust, know of it, they don't really know the impact of it. And we ended up talking to a Holocaust survivor, which was crazy to think. And that definitely helped me. And this also helps you realize the idea that every victim was actually an individual with a life, with a story, and they were all sent to those camps. And if we were to go to Auschwitz, we would have learned about the Book of Names. We would have seen the Book of Names, which was like only it was like 3 million names in, or there was a certain number of names in this book. It's a ginormous book of everyone that passed away in the Holocaust, and were murdered, but it's not fully filled. I think there's still like 2 million that are yet to be found, which is just.
So what's the estimate for how many people died in the camps?
Well, we know that 6 million in Auschwitz.
6 million, wow.
So 6 million, actually I don't know if it's Auschwitz or overall, but 6 million is a number there, and it's terrible. So I also have notes from the lessons. I'll get to Manfred Goldberg, who was the Holocaust survivor. But 6 million murders. Post-war was also quite difficult for Jewish people. And the first lesson was really about humanizing the Holocaust. And what I mean by that, like what the Jewish people experienced, like there was Jewish hate propaganda. And this is what I'm talking about, how people wouldn't identify as Jewish. There was a girl called Berta, like she enjoyed school and German life. She lived in Leipzig. And the family were not strictly traditional Jewish people. They believe they were Germans first.
Yeah.
And they were, once this Jewish propaganda started and everything, she was shunned by her friends after Nazis came to control Leipzig. Yeah. And her parents were killed eventually, and she was sent to England as a refugee. And we also have to talk about anti-Semitism in the Holocaust.
Yeah.
Obviously, it was like the big thing. And if you don't know anti-Semitism, it was the hate towards Jewish people. And then we learned this thing called about collaborators, so people who helped helped during the Holocaust to kill all these Jewish people. There were like Croatian camps. There were Lithuanian shootings, so there were other countries joining in.
Yeah.
Whether it was economic or they were also anti-Semitic, it's not as clear. But like the build up towards the Holocaust, there were like anti-Jewish laws.
Yeah.
Where they got rid of their citizenship, no mixed marriage. They were excluded socially, and obviously they damaged Jewish properties and all that. And then the introduction of ghettos, we learn about that in school. And it was around 1941 when they began proper killings and mass shooting. And more than half were killed on other sites than concentration camps.
Yeah.
And in 1938, 31,000 people were sent to concentration camps. And there were actually none in Germany and Austria to start. So that's that for like the build up as well. And then we got on to like other people who were part of the Holocaust. So there were Jewish people, but there were also other minorities and groups of people that were affected. So there was a guy called Richard Grun, and he was a gay man, and he was persecuted, and around 50,000 gay people were imprisoned. So being gay was also like illegal in most countries as well. And black and mixed race people were also sent to labour camps, which was, this is just showing everyone that was part of the Holocaust as well. And even people with like epilepsy, there was a girl called Teresa Karas. She was murdered in a camp, and she was disabled. Because she was disabled, she was sent to the camp, which was crazy to think about. And Jehovah's Witnesses as well were also sent to the camp, because they actually they are to God. Their allegiance is to God, Jehovah's Witnesses, and they refused their allegiance to state. So they were targeted for their beliefs and their rejection of state, like worship. And there was and then we talk about a Soviet prisoner of war who was captured by Germans. So there were also these twins who were experimented on, and they ended up having health problems for life. And they were gypsies. A lot of gypsies were taken as well, but they also like to be called Roma and Sinti instead of gypsies, because that's a bit outdated now. So also Jewish people in the English territory were taken. So in places like Jersey and Guernsey, they were also taken. So it was happening all over. So it was happening in English. Think about it as the war, and England were fighting against, but they were getting taken from their English territory, which is just terrifying. And I just wanted to say they also gave us a guide for students and teachers about the Holocaust, which just has so much information about. I can't go through it all, but it talks about like Jewish people, Hitler, the rise of the Nazis, all the way up to like just the final solution in 1941 to 45, where they a lot of Germans tried burning the camps and trying to get rid of the evidence of the Holocaust existing. So a lot of soldiers were also killed by the Germans, like the Sonderkommandos. They were shot as well because and a lot of them killed themselves because they had information about the Holocaust. And by this time, they just wanted to get rid of every evidence of the Holocaust. So that's why maybe a lot of people believe it didn't happen, but it definitely did happen. So we ended up, and then probably the biggest lesson for me was the talk with the Holocaust survivor. Now, unfortunately, they only asked a few questions from students, so I didn't get to ask him a question. But he was a Holocaust survivor, and he just told us more and more about the Holocaust, and this is firsthand what it was like, and so like how Germany shut their borders, and at first they were like given the opportunity to get visas, but it was very hard for them to get visas, and there was also this thing that was really big for the Allies. Like they didn't make any attempt to solve this Jewish problem early on. There was an international conference in France in 1938, and and Allies also took part in this conference. They ended up there was no practical improvement for Jews during this conference, which is very sad. Manfred's parents were born in Poland. He spent 20 years in Germany, and his father was arrested. His father left, I think, to go to Britain 2 weeks after World War II. And then by the time the war started, it was impossible for Jewish people in Germany. And Jewish employees were being fired, and it was at this point it was by law. Like Jewish people had to get fired, and 80% of Jewish shops were extorted. And synagogues and shops were vandalized as well, which was very bad. And 1938 was around when it started. It was actually believed that the Holocaust began due to the France conference, due to their no attempt of resolving this discrimination towards Jewish people. You could think that the Anti-Semitists saw this as like a chance to capitalize from it, and just create all of this in the Holocaust. And also he started talking about the Yellow Star, which made Jewish people a subject to discrimination. If you were that Yellow Star, a lot of people would throw things at you, and it would be horrible. Jewish schools were closed. Jewish students were expelled if they didn't go to Jewish schools. And these are probably the same students that didn't identify as Jewish, which is crazy. And in 1941, he was like told to pack things and leave his house, and he only had around like 10 minutes to pack things. And he travelled for 3 days and nights, and he ended up going to Riga, which is the capital of Latvia, where there was a ghetto, and he was sent to. And it was late November. They killed all the Riga Jews in a nearby forest, so they dig a giant hole and shoot all these Jewish people, and then they all be in that hole, and they just leave them there. The ghetto was emptied in 10 days, but 10 young men survived to police the ghetto. Maintain law in there. And eventually, the officers would tell the kids and people that they no longer possess a name. It was only a number. And then they were put on a starvation diet, and were told to surrender money. And if they were caught smuggling food, they would die. There was a lot of situations where they would just be killed if they broke any rules. His mother worked and took care of his brother, and this was and German industrialists were also promised unlimited slave labour, and this was, of course, the Jewish people would be doing this slave labour. And children and parents were also divided at one point, and the children asked the parents to, be together, but it never ended up happening. The elderly were stripped and killed at one point, and in 1943 he was transported 2 days and 2 nights to wooden barracks where I've already explained the living conditions, which are horrible. And at age 13, he had to work, and he was ordered to dig up Allied bombing junctions, and replace rails, which are most of the time heavy.
Yeah.
So can you imagine a 13-year-old trying to carry this heavy metal rail, and only help from other children? And then a lot of Jewish people were dragged by Latvian soldiers to be executed, and he was split from his brother, and he never actually found his brother. And his mother survived, luckily, after sneaking naked across to the group of people where her son was, where Manfred was, because they were split up, the older and the younger, I believe. And she ran, and obviously they were naked, and she hid in the crowd, which a lot of Jewish people did do. They tried running to the other side to survive. A lot of them were rounded up and killed, unfortunately. So he had to fake his age as well. He was 14, but had to say he was 17 to survive. And he had to work daily, like repair bomb damaged rails, as well as more rail work, more slave labour. And his number was actually 56478. Now imagine getting your name removed and giving a number as your identity. Like, how horrible must that be? And then at one point he became a personal slave of an SS soldier. So a lot of soldiers would have like personal slaves, Jewish people, to do their work. So to like cleaning. So he didn't have a room to sit down. And a lot of Jewish people died by starvation, as I mentioned earlier. A lot of Jewish people tried to end their lives as well, which is horrible. His mother and him also survived until April 1941. And then they were like taken out to sea for 6 days. And then he said 30 people drowned a day, which was horrible. And then I believe a prisoner of war ended up taking the ship and tried sailing to shore. And so I think they took over the ship and they tried sailing to shore, and then the mother and him jumped to shore, where the SS started marching at them. But then British tanks came and liberated them. But they carried on moving. Their main objective of wherever they needed to go wasn't there. They weren't there to save them. You could say it was luck that they were saved. And a truckload of British troops ended up saving them. Which is really it was really relieving. They've probably been through so much as well. After the war, try and get back into normal life, and so that was pretty much that lesson for the Manfred Goldberg, who was a Holocaust survivor. And that is pretty much everything we talked about in the Holocaust Trust program. And once again, this was way more impactful than I thought, considering it was going to be virtual. They did a very good job at really making it real for us with the virtual reality and the just descriptions and the information they gave us. Very real and very impactful. And I learned a lot. Like I said before, it was going into detail rather than telling us what the Holocaust is. They knew that we knew what the Holocaust was, but it was in detail and learning about individuals and the perpetrators and the collaborators, and just humanizing the Holocaust.
I mean, this is really hard hitting stuff, but why do you think it's so important for us to learn about the Holocaust?
Mainly because this was an attempt to wipe out a whole race of people. Which should never be a thing. And obviously, so we don't do it again. So something like when something rises like anti-Semitism, which has risen over these past few years, we can notice it early and try and bring justice as well. And just make sure in present day that we come to peace and something as terrible as this never happens.
Yeah. So on your virtual experience, I guess, tour, did you go through like the rooms separately?
We went through, so there were like YouTube videos where, so the first one was we'd be out in the open and we'd see the carriage, and it was a giant carriage where they carry the people, and then we got another virtual reality video where it would be us in the barracks, so we could see what the conditions were really like, and they were horrible. And you can imagine as the weather changed, it got really hot in there, or really cold in there. So the conditions were just awful. They were dehumanized at that point. And then we got one more virtual reality video where we'd be out in the open and we'd be looking at the buildings and the pathways leading up to just camps and just things in the camp. And that was very, like, the buildings were very intimidating and cold. They were just giant brick buildings, and then there was like barbed wire around it, and there were like signs with skulls on it, which was just like, can you imagine being a 10-year-old boy walking down there just thinking, what is going to happen to me? So
out of the whole thing, what was the thing that really made you extremely emotional?
What impacted me the most was probably the talk with Manfred Goldberg, because this is a Holocaust survivor and he's spread his word to thousands of like students like me, and that was very impactful. This is someone who survived the Holocaust. Like, that is such a low chance considering how many people were murdered, and the whole idea of the Holocaust was to wipe out a whole race of people. So
I guess it's extremely hard to even imagine putting yourself in the position of any of the people in Auschwitz or anything. So I guess speaking to him and listening to his stories is a way to step into someone's shoes that went through all of that.
Oh, definitely. It was such a it was just so interesting to think like this man has survived Holocaust during the 1940s, and definitely, I agree. It's very emotional. We hope you enjoyed this video about the Holocaust. A bit of a different video, a bit of a different podcast, but it's very important, and everyone should, I believe, do more research about the Holocaust and read books about it, because it's something that should never happen again. And now it's a part of history. We as the people to spread this story should look into it more.
It's something that everyone can or should learn from 100%.
Definitely, it's just a very important thing to learn. So humanity doesn't make that same mistake. And at some time in the future there will be no more Holocaust survivors. So it's our job to tell people about it, and when they're ready, in detail even. That's how important it is. So we hope you enjoyed this video, and we will see you next time. Goodbye.